every time I see a film coming out by Dinesh D'Souza, I say to myself, oh my gosh, I cannot believe he chose to talk about this.
All my films, if you were to summarize, like, what is the unifying topic? It's the meaning of America. The left very cunningly took fascism from the left-wing column and moved it into the right-wing column. Now you have the utterly bizarre phenomenon where somebody can go up to Benjamin Netanyahu and call him a fascist or even a Nazi. I did an online debate with this Nick Fuentes character, and he's like, Israel controls, America. If 10 million people can pull that off, how is that even possible? People come to believe utterly preposterous things.
Dinesh, you have one of the most fascinating journeys to American conservatism. And also, in my estimation, you're probably one of the most well-known conservative filmmakers, probably in the world. And so I am so curious to hear about your background. How did you become what you are, Dinesh D'Souza?
Well, I was born in Mumbai, India, into a middle-class family. I went to school in Bombay, came to America at the age of 17 as an exchange student. I lived in Arizona for a year with 4 different families and went to high school, the 12th grade. By a series of coincidences, I ended up at college, Dartmouth, so you could say I came to America and never went home. I then caught the political bug while I was in college. This was in the early Reagan years. So I became a young Reaganite and spent most of my career in so-called think tanks, academic institutions that were policy-oriented, the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., the Hoover Institution at Stanford in California. And then in 2012, so, about 15 years ago, 13 years ago, I started making the documentary films. And it partly reflected, I'd been an author before and speaker, but I realize our culture is changing, and is becoming more visual, more colloquial, and social media. And so a format that I wouldn't previously have considered, in fact, I would have probably been really bewildered had you asked me in my earlier career about films or documentary films. I would think that that's nothing to do with what I'm about, but somehow I backed into it and grew to enjoy it. And of course, since we've done 8 or 9 films by now, we've gotten really good at it. It's a very difficult business, documentary films. But on the other hand, if you do it well, you can survive and survive to do the next one. So it's been a rewarding field, and it's also gets the films to a much wider audience that you could otherwise reach from, say, a book or certainly from a talk.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing way to storytell, which you're an amazing storyteller. I don't know if you were always a great storyteller, or did you develop that skill set with time?
A book and a film functions very differently. A book is more like, when you watch a legal case and the prosecutor stands up and says, I'm going to prove this and this and this and this. In a book, you can do that. You can spell out your conclusions at the beginning, and you're then using the rest of the book to document your case and support it with footnotes, references, that kind of thing. A film isn't like that. A film is more like a story. And a good documentary film has a lot of the elements of a good feature film. So what do feature films have? They have character, they have suspense, they have plot, they have climax, they have dialogue. So a good documentary film will have all those elements, and you want the viewer to go on a journey with you where they make realizations along the way, and then you carry them through not just an intellectual, but an emotional arc, so that when they are at the end of the film, they not only think differently, but they feel differently. And this is the distinctive element of filmmaking. Now, the type of documentary films that we do require a strange combination of aptitudes, right? Because see, if you're on the left, if I was Michael Moore, I would go to a Hollywood studio. I'd say, I want to make a film on gun control. They go, here's $10 million. I then come back and go, here's my film. They go, okay, you're booked on The View, The Good Morning America, The Today Show, you'll be on Jimmy Kimmel, right? On our side, it's not like that
The
at
opposite.
all, right? On our side, you need to have some legal background to draw up the legal papers. Then you need to be a fundraiser because you need to find investors to put up the money for the film. Then you have to have the creative side to be able to know how to shoot the film and make it and edit it. And even if you do all that, your film will still fail if you're not good at marketing and distribution. So the reason that this genre is difficult is that creative people know how to make creative things, but then they can't raise money and they don't know how to market.
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, you have people who have a lot of money and they're like, I want to make a film. I've got the money, but they don't have the creative side.
Right.
So the key, I think, to what we do is we try to have good people, a good team, and do all those key things well so that the film succeeds on all counts.
The other thing that you haven't mentioned yet, which is really unique to you, is the topics that you pick for your documentaries. So every time I see a film coming out from you, I say to myself, oh my gosh, I cannot believe he chose to talk about this one. It's like you're one of the few who's really willing to run against the herd and be very bold about it. How do you pick your subjects for these documentaries?
A good documentary, I think, from my view, is it satisfies some key criteria. So one, the topic has to be timely. And by timely, remember, a film is concocted a year before it comes out. So it can't be timely in the sense of that's what everybody's talking about today. By timely, I mean it's something that is gnawing at the culture, an unresolved issue of some sort. That's the first thing. If you don't make a film that surfs on the wave, you're irrelevant. And so that's one criterion. The second is that we have to have something truly original to say. And by that, I mean, usually on any topic, there's a conventional wisdom. There may be a conventional wisdom on the left, and there may be a conventional wisdom on the right. I see no point in making a film that just reaffirms that conventional wisdom. So what I have to do is take the conventional wisdom and ask, what is the underlying issue that is being missed here? Or what is the way to take this topic to the deeper level? Everybody thinks they're already at the ground floor, but maybe there's a basement underneath that. And by getting there, you now illuminate things in a sort of a fresh way. If you don't have that element of novelty, again, then your film is not doing anything distinctive, and people have no real reason to see it. See, to me, a film takes a lot of effort to see. If you have to get up or round up your family on a weekend, go to a theater, it's a lot of effort. And so if you just go, that's interesting, it's not enough to make someone want to go. You have to reach a much higher level, which is like, I have to see this film. I know I'm busy. I know I have 10 things to do, but I'm going to get myself to the theater, or I'm going to take the time to watch it. And so for that to happen, people need to be able to see a trailer and go, whoa, this is extremely interesting, and I need to see this film. And I say all this because, I realize that if you see 100 people in a food court in a mall, most of them would not typically say, I'll pay money and go see a documentary film. They might go see a thriller, a superhero film, maybe a romantic comedy, but the documentary film is a tough genre. So for all these reasons, I think the third element of a film, I think, is that it needs to be visually and emotionally compelling. A film can be very interesting intellectually, but if what you see on the screen is not captivating, it fails the visual test. And the film is a visual medium. Now, a book is not a visual medium. You do have to read, and you need to look at the paper, but the book is functioning inside of your head. Your mind is doing the work. In the film, your eyes are doing the work, your ears are doing the work. And so films have to be music to your ears and exciting to watch. And if a film it doesn't matter if the topic is interesting and timely. If it fails on that count, I don't make that film.
When I think of films that you make, I think about films that are not just interesting, but films that actually make you want to take action and move. And for those who haven't followed your films as closely as I have, maybe you can just mention a few of them. And, maybe there are some that you were a little nervous about creating or not sure where it's going to lead to?
Yeah. So the first film was about Obama's America, and I confronted a very difficult challenge because now I thought that my idea about Obama was very novel and very interesting. It was Obama is not the civil rights guy that you think he is. His background is not Selma and Montgomery. He is not the political equivalent of Martin Luther King. My argument was this guy, his ideas come out of the third world. They come out of the anti-colonial movements in Ghana and India and all across Africa. His is the spirit of Frantz Fanon, not Martin Luther King. But if you're going to make a film for a mass audience, nobody has heard of anti-colonialism. Nobody knows what that even means. To the degree that people know what it means, they think it's a good thing because America was a colony of the British. So they go, anti-colonialism is, that's like the American founding. That's a good thing. So the challenge of that film was to take a topic that is relatively intellectually obscure and make it understandable and pressingly relevant. So that was hard because it was my first film. So I was feeling my way in how to get something like that done. It was a big challenge. So that's a memorable film for me looking back. I would say that my film called Hillary's America was, I think, important, not so much even because of what it did with Hillary, although some people did give that film some credit because that was a very close election, 2016. And our film was shown in a lot of the swing states right in the period leading up to the election. But a lot of that film the subtitle is The Secret History of the Democratic Party. And excavating out that history and telling it as a narrative had never been done before. Particularly because the progressive intellectuals who dominate that kind of historiography have no interest in telling the story at all. So that's a lot of what we try to do in the films is tell a different story. And the other thing is we try to do it in a way which takes you to the scene of the crime. So if I fast forward now to 2000 Mules, there was a lot of talk about election fraud. And a lot of it was about so-and-so has, Sidney Powell has affidavits and they're boarding up the windows over here and they stopped the count over there. But my thought was, well, people already know that. And so for me to make a film which regurgitates all that, again, people are like, well, I'm already there. You need to go beyond that. And so when we sat down with these guys from True the Vote and we talked about the cell phone geo-tracking, even then I was thinking to myself, cell phone geo-tracking is all very interesting because it's technologically cool, the ability to track someone on a phone. But what are you going to show visually on the screen? I'm just going to show you maps of people moving, lights moving across the screen. After a few minutes, that's completely boring. So it's kind of like if you were to make a film about a bunch of people robbing Fort Knox. You need to see the burglars coming through the window. You need to see them cracking open the safe. You need to see them put the gold bars into satchels, right? So it wasn't until I saw the surveillance video that I was like, all right, this is a really interesting movie. No one has seen this footage. You see people stuffing ballot after ballot after ballot. And it's not only that, because you if you look at their body language, right? You have a car pulling up like in the middle of the night. Who votes at like 1:30 in the morning? The guy gets out. He looks to the left and right to make sure no one's there. He gets a backpack full of ballots. So you see right there that it's new information. It's bombshell. It's shocking. And the viewer, I'm not saying trust me, because affidavits is trust me, right? Because I haven't read your affidavits. I don't know who made those affidavits. But if I can show you that this was actually in the days leading up to the election and you're looking, I'm putting you in real time. And this is why the left went nuts over that film, because they realized how damaging it is to show people with their own eyes what happened in the 2020 election. And of course, we have our new film, which I'm very excited about, which is a bit of a departure from me, because all my topics, all my films, if you were to summarize, like what is the unifying topic?
America.
It's the meaning of America from various different angles. But the new film, for the first time, really travels abroad, and it is an attempt to integrate issues of the Middle East, Hamas, terrorism, anti-Semitism, but also biblical archaeology and a hint of biblical prophecy. So that's new territory for me, but I think the film is going to be very unique and very explosive.
Well, we'll talk about your new journey in a minute, but I want to focus a little bit more on how you produce your films. And as you speak about the different subjects that you cover and how you do the work that you do, the word that comes to my mind is a word that I think about all the time, and that is discernment. How you have the ability to discern what to cover and when to cover it and what way to cover it. And I think one of the reasons why you have such sharp discernment is because you're so knee deep in what is happening in America. You have your own show. You're constantly writing. You're constantly talking about the major issues that are facing Americans. And so you're able to kind of see around corners and say, okay, in a year's time, people are really going to need to know this or that. And so with this issue of discernment, I'd love to just tap into your mind a little bit and get a sense of some of the current events that we're dealing with right now here in the United States of America, specifically President Trump and his immigration laws. So both you and your wife, Debbie, are immigrants to the United States, right? You came from India. Debbie came from Venezuela. You are living the American dream. I am sure you have a heart and understanding of what it's like to immigrate and the opportunities there are for immigrants who want to come and live here. What is your reaction to President Trump's immigration policies?
Debbie and I are immigrants who came to America in the old style. And by that I mean, well, it's a little complex. A lot of immigrants who came to America in older times came out of necessity, right? The pilgrims who fleeing horrible both persecution and difficult political conditions in Europe. Refugees from other societies who came, the Irish came after the potato famines and so on. And they crossed the ocean with the full knowledge that they could never go back. And so their full embrace of America was to some degree forced, because it's like, I've burned all my bridges. I'm not returning home. I'm here for better or worse. I need to become part of this society. The today's immigrants, not all, but quite a few, come under very different conditions. Their view is that I am bringing Pakistan into America. I'm bringing India to America. I'm bringing Mexico to America. And I don't need to be different in any fundamental way. I can have essentially an Indian way of life at an American standard of living. I don't need to have any allegiance to American society. My kids don't need to join the military. They wouldn't dream of doing something so ridiculous. We are here, but we are not of here. And that is a real shift. And now that is not a shift entirely created by the immigrants, because it has been exacerbated by a political left that not only tells you that you don't need to assimilate, but actively propagandizes you against traditional America, propagandizes you and makes you feel like you are a sellout if you do assimilate. Mm-hmm. So it's against this backdrop that we have seen kind of a changing landscape toward immigration. Reagan was very pro-immigration. Trump in general is anti-immigration, but Reagan was pro a different understanding of immigration. If Reagan were alive today, Reagan would be closer to the Trump position, because the new concept of immigration has a certain degree of anti-Americanism built into it. So Debbie and I don't share any of that. And so, my position is that we should have legal immigration. We need to reform our legal system so that we have immigrants who both want to come here, they're coming here because they think America is a great club and they want to be members. And second of all, they come here because we want them, meaning the country needs them. so that both sides benefit from this collaboration. And so I think that our legal system itself is very defective and needs to be revamped. Illegal immigration, I am vehemently opposed to. And I think that we are appropriately harsh on illegal immigration. I think that even our deportation of the criminals doesn't go far enough, in the sense that I don't like the fact that 8 million people could come in the last 4 years under Biden, and then we just have to shrug and say, well, listen, as long as you follow our laws and you can stay permanently. That's just that makes a joke out of the whole idea of having a country and having a border and having laws in the first place. So my view is that Trump is dealing with a new phenomenon, which is that the Democratic Party has decided that a porous border is politically beneficial to it in the long term. This was not the Democratic Party in the Reagan era. It is a new tactic by the Democrats, and it's a very difficult one to deal with.
What do you think Ronald Reagan would say about the Trump tariffs? And what are your thoughts on the tariffs on India?
I think that my view on tariffs has modified over the years for a couple of reasons. In the old days, I was very much of a Reaganite, Milton Friedman free market guy. And it was based upon the idea that a tariff is a tax. And it's better to have a world in which there are fewer taxes and goods can move freely based upon supply and demand across borders. I think that there is a common point between Trump and Reagan, and that is both of them in principle would rather have no tariffs at all. I don't think Trump thinks tariffs in principle are needed. If you listen to Trump very carefully, here's what he's saying. Other countries have taken advantage of us for 40 years, and we need to level the playing field. If they have high tariffs and we have no tariffs, basically they are claiming free access to the American market, but they won't give us access to their markets. So we have to think of tariffs not just economically, but politically. They are a lever to bring down their tariffs and create more of a level playing field. So it's not that Reagan was free trade and Trump is not. It's that Trump is more alert to the political element of all this in a way that I think Reagan was not focused on. The other thing about these tariffs, I think, is that we've come to increasing understanding now of the way in which our institutions are not as neutral as they led us to believe they were. I mean, we're learning this about the CDC, we're learning this about the FBI, but it's also true about the Federal Reserve. So, in other words, what I'm getting at is that we have a gaming of the system that is going on to a far greater degree than we previously suspected. So the libertarian position has been sort of exposed a little bit because the libertarian always was sort of like government bad, private sector good. Okay. But then when you have a regime of censorship in which the government is involved, but digital platforms which are private are eagerly collaborating with the government, and hundreds of private nonprofits are feeding names to the government saying, ban these guys, then you realize that this big distinction between government bad, private sector good is just not applicable to the world in which we live. These people are in it together. And so a little bit of a revised understanding is not only appropriate, it's demanded.
There was something interesting that I've been thinking about President Trump in the last few days as I've come back from my travel in Europe. And that is the lack of appreciation for Donald Trump's prevention of wars. People look at presidents and say, oh, look, he started a war, he ended a war, right? There was this war that started. Did he end it or not? But President Trump has been using tariffs and the economy to prevent wars. And I don't know that much attention is being paid to that. Well, you think about the war that he prevented through the use of tariffs, right, in Cambodia, in India, and I can give a whole bunch of other examples. And so what are your thoughts of President Trump's use of tariffs to engage in these worldwide geopolitics and war prevention, possibly?
I think Trump's insight here is that flourishing commercial societies don't go to war because they have too much to lose, and everybody's gaining from business. And so when Trump says something, it seems on the face of it preposterous. He'll say something like, Gaza should be a Riviera. And people go, what? This man's insane. Who would say something like that? But what Trump is really saying is something like this. He's saying, listen, if people spend their whole life thinking about the grievances inflicted on their ancestors, my great-grandfather was chased out of Lebanon, or this guy, had a feud against my family going back to 1830, then your society becomes narrow, provincial, vendetta-oriented. But when you have a society like Singapore, where people think about how's my startup going to function? And, how do I sell my products now all over Europe? And how do I get the technology that I need? Then your whole mindset is different. You're just not interested in going and sticking a knife in your neighbor's back. And I've actually seen the truth of this. You look at the India-Pakistan conflict, which I grew up with. This is like first of all, a bunch of people who look exactly the same. They're ethnically identical. Now, one group largely Hindu, but not exclusively. The other group almost overwhelmingly Muslim. But they're fighting over this piece of land called Kashmir. And they've been fighting about it since 1947. But what happens to India is in the last 25 years, the Indians suddenly realize that we have something, which is a labor pool, of Indian, not only unskilled labor, much of which, by the way, goes and works in the Middle East, but then of skilled labor and of technically competent labor. And we can supply that element to the global economy. And suddenly the lifestyle of the Indian starts improving. And now the average Indian's mentality is, who wants to go fight over some godforsaken piece of real estate in northern India? The Pakistanis are a nuisance. We don't have to pay any attention to them. We're just not interested in that anymore. So Trump operates from that model. The model is that let's get everybody, including some of these ancient societies, to have a whiff and a taste and the excitement of seeing their standard of living dramatically improve. And as a result, they won't want to nurse ancient hatreds. With regard to the point about the wars being prevented, I do think that in some ways the model here was set by Reagan, because people give, the great figures of the 20th century, the most consequential are FDR and Reagan. People will say of FDR, well, he got America out of the Depression. Not really true, but he was a key figure in winning World War II. That is true. But with Reagan, you have to go with Margaret Thatcher's description of his legacy, which was he won the Cold War without firing a shot. Mm-hmm. You had an incredibly dangerous situation with a very aggressive nuclear-tipped adversary, and to pull off a victory in the Cold War with essentially no loss of life, huge achievement. Trump is in that tradition. Trump recognizes that if I can solve a problem and prevent people from being killed, that is a bigger accomplishment than getting into a war, pulverizing the enemy, and winning that way. The bigger victory is the war not made but prevented.
Do you think that the strategy of using the economy and tariffs is a strategy that could work with the Muslim world? Is that the same factor that those leaders are even interested in?
To a degree, yes. I do think that, look at the fact that, for example, Saudi Arabia, which is a very ancient society. And by that, I mean it comes out of the world of the Bedouins. And the ordinary Saudi Arabian is still pretty much in mentality a bit of a Bedouin. You feel when you're there that you're living hundreds of years ago. At the same time, Saudi Arabia is like in the frontier of AI. They are in the frontier of artificial intelligence. There are key figures in the royal family who very much believe that their role is to navigate a transition for Saudi Arabia to a more modern society. So they speak Trump's language. And so does the United Arab Emirates and a number of the other Gulf kingdoms. On the other hand, the mullahs in Iran, the terrorist groups like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, they are dug in. Prosperity threatens these groups. They don't want the Muslim to bring his eyes down from heaven toward earthly comforts or benefits. They have a vested interest in the ideology of martyrdom. They are very explicit in saying it. And I've got to say that one of the things about Islam that is terrifyingly impressive is that even though it occurred in the 7th century, I mean, look, there are Orthodox Jews, but most of Israel is secular. There are devout Christians, but much of the West is secular. Islam has not lost the force of its original revelation. You have Muslims today who are just as, devout as if Muhammad lived like 30 years ago. And that produces a fanaticism and a kind of theological political agenda that resists the Trumpian formula completely.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a big concern. As I described to you, I just came back from I was in Hungary and I was in Austria. I actually traveled with the PragerU team there, and spent some time in Hungary, seeing how they really worked very hard to preserve their Christian values. And Prime Minister Orbán speaks about that. And then I traveled to Austria, where it feels like Austria has probably changed quite a bit over the past few years. And I'll just share with you, I had this very bizarre experience when I was walking around. I got my son an ice cream in District 1, which is kind of the center of Vienna. And I pulled out my American Express, and the lady at the shop looked at the word American on it. And I'm always very proud to be an American, and so is my kid. And so we said, yes, we're American. And the woman looked back at me and said, oh, President Trump, he's like Hitler. I'm like, the irony behind this, by the way, Dinesh, that this woman is calling my president, President Trump, Hitler, while we have chants of free Palestine, Jew-hating protests right outside the door while she's serving me this ice cream. And I'd just love your reaction to this entire experience that I had, because one of the first things that came to my mind as I was walking out of the ice cream shop was this book that you had written in 2017, The Big Lie, which is essentially about Nazi Germany.
So we need to pin down exactly what this big lie is. The big lie is the transposition in the meaning of fascism and Nazism. The original fascism was a phenomenon of the political left. It was anti-capitalist. It was explicitly socialist, and hence the name Nazi, which is essentially a compression of National Socialism. And this wasn't just Hitler using the term, because the Nazis have, which you can look it up online, a 25-point platform, which they campaigned on. This was their platform. And their platform, if you read it, it's very clear. It's state control of the banks, state control of industry, state control of education, state control of the churches, state control of the media. So you go down this list and you go, does this sound more like Donald Trump, or does it sound more like, let's say, Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders? And the answer is, it sounds exactly like Bernie Sanders. It's the left-wing agenda. So the Nazis, the fascists, which is Mussolini in Italy, they saw themselves as on the left. The critics of fascism also saw them as being on the left. Everybody recognized that this was a phenomenon of the left. However, after World War II, when fascism and Nazism became completely discredited, people saw the starving, emaciated figures coming out of the concentration camps. You could not defend fascism or Nazism anymore. The progressive intellectuals who dominated American academia and also the emerging intellectual classes of Europe, they all realized that their own views were suspiciously close to those of Mussolini and not all that far from those of Hitler. And so they realized we have to sort of redefine fascism and Nazism to remove our association with it. And so what they basically did is they said, fascism is not what you thought it was. It's not an economic agenda. It's not about any of this. Fascism simply means militarism and nationalism. Now, first of all, there are militaries all over the world, right? The Chinese have a military. Genghis Khan had a military. Genghis Khan wasn't a fascist. And if you say that fascism is nationalism, that doesn't make any sense either. Gandhi was a nationalist. He wasn't a fascist, right? You've got all kinds of figures who are Mandela was a nationalist.
George Washington
was a nationalist. So nationalism runs the whole political gamut from left to right. It depends on who that particular nationalist is. But the left very cunningly took fascism from the left-wing column and moved it into the right-wing column so that now you have the utterly bizarre phenomenon where somebody can go up to Benjamin Netanyahu and point their finger at him and call him a fascist or even a Nazi. Right. Without the intellectual spade work of doing what I just described, that would be impossible, in fact, ludicrous. But because this project has been so successful of redefining fascism, that's the big lie, they're now able to do it with a straight face and get credible people, gullible people to believe them.
So people will respond to this and say, well, Dinesh, yes, it is true that there is horrible anti-Semitism on the left, but now we're starting to see horrible anti-Semitism on the right. And there is horrible anti-Israel on the right. And so how do you explain the big lie, as in accuse the Jew of what you should actually be blamed for, which is what we're seeing in many, many cases, those who accuse the Jews of pedophilia or those who accuse the Jews of thievery or colonialization or whatever it is that they're accusing the Jews. Oftentimes it's actually what they themselves are doing. We are seeing this both on the left and on the right.
Yes, I do think, and this is something that has been very striking to me, is the way in which anti-Semitism, and this is different than, let's say, racism, the accusations against the Jews come from sometimes opposite directions. And not only that, the Jews are accused simultaneously of being opposite things, which you can't be. So, for example, the Jews are accused of being left-wing communists and secular perverts. And at the same time, they're accused of being fanatically, in fact, Hitler accused the Jews of being insidious capitalists and controlling the banks and running all the financial institutions, and being feverishly tribalistic and nationalistic. So you can see here that what I'm getting at is that it's like, get your story straight. Mm-hmm. You know, I was recently in this, I did an online debate with this Nick Fuentes character, this young whippersnapper guy. And he's like, Israel controls, America. And I'm like, are you saying that a group of 10 to 12 million people have somehow established control over a group of 350 million people who are part of a much bigger and stronger and richer country. How is that even possible? I mean, if 10 million people can pull that off, I was like, maybe they are the master race, And his face was like, he looked a little startled. But what I was getting at is that people come to believe utterly preposterous things.
Why? Why the Jews?
Because, again, the Jews, see, with traditional racism, in a way it's very simple, right? Because in racism, I'm up here, you're down there.
Yeah.
You're inferior, you're unintelligent, you're a loser. But nobody would accuse you of running the world because you're too stupid to run the world. I should be running your life because I'm smarter and better than you are. Many people will connect anti-Semitism and racism, but notice how anti-Semitism doesn't work like that. Because with anti-Semitism, it's almost like the Jews are up here and I'm down here. And I'm looking at the Jews and going, you're running everything. You control Hollywood. You control business. You control the media. So there are new emotional elements that come into it, including the element of envy, including the idea that I'm not doing as well as I think I should be because somebody else is taking advantage of me. Notice that this is part of left-wing victimology, right? Because left-wing victimology is that if I'm not succeeding as a woman, it's because we live in a patriarchal world. If I'm not succeeding as a person of color, it's because white people control the system. This phenomenon is now observable on the right.
This is what Hitler accused the Jews of as well. He accused the Jews of Germany basically being destroyed because of financial elitism that the Jews had. It does seem to rhyme.
In the case of Germany, the remarkable thing was that the Jews in Christian Europe had been pushed into these financial industries because the Christians would say things like, well, we will not lend money at interest, we'll let the Jews do that kind of thing. And so you have the Shylock character emerging in Shakespearean literature, for example. So it's not as if the Jews all just said, we want to go into finance. And to some degree, that was forced upon them. And then Hitler comes along and goes, you people are too powerful in finance. You people control the banks. You people are running our society. And also this idea that, again, the Jews were pushed into separate neighborhoods, right? And so, for example, in The Merchant of Venice, the Jews don't live with the Christians. They live apart. They live in their own sort of Jewish ghetto, so to speak. And so Hitler accuses the Jews, again, of being a people apart. Well, how did they become that way? They were forced into these enclaves in medieval and post-medieval Europe. So I think that it's to me very alarming to see this anti-Semitic blast, which I haven't seen in my earlier career on the right at all, suddenly show its face, and sometimes in surprising quarters, coming from people that I know and that I've dealt with over the years, and I would not have expected it from them. And so it has unnerved me to see the zeal with which they push, I think, this ugly and indefensible cause.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the word zeal, which is what's very surprising. I use the term obsession. There seems to be an obsession, a constant obsession throughout history, but even now, especially now since October 7th, with the Jews and with Israel. So Israel is a country the size of New Jersey. And here we are finding so many podcasters constantly talking about Israel as if it's the one and only most important subject that they can speak about. And I got to wonder, maybe it is the one and only most important subject that people need to speak about. Is Israel the center of the world? And is there something almost mystical that is beyond supernatural that we need to understand is going on here? Because there are conflicts all over the world. There are Christians being massacred all over the world, in Africa, all over the Middle East, right? But there is this constant conversation about Gaza and Israel, a country the size of New Jersey. I know you have become very interested in it as well, right? It's like, how does a person from India who migrates to the United States, who marries a Venezuelan, who lives in Houston, how do you become so focused and interested in Israel as well? I'm curious, what is your conclusion for why Israel continues and the Jews continue to be the center of a worldwide conversation?
I think that for much of my career, I was looking at Israel primarily through a political lens. And viewed that way, Israel appears to be important, but not central. And by that I mean, if you had asked me in the 80s and 90s, like, why is the Middle East important? I would say, well, obviously it's because the United States needs oil. That's the only reason. And if people said, well, why is Israel important? I go, well, that's because Israel is our friend in the place where we need to get our oil. And so Israel is kind of a good ally to have. So this is looking at things in a political lens. As time passed, I began to think to myself, why is it the case that longstanding disputes can be resolved in other parts of the world, but in this one spot, nothing gets resolved? I mean, I saw prime ministers going back to, Nixon, Carter, Reagan, Clinton. They all have peace plans and Nobel Prizes are handed out. But fundamentally, the issue doesn't go away. And I've come to the view that the reason it doesn't go away is that Israel is to a certain degree a mystical place. And by that I mean it is a place that, and by the way, this is something that was also believed to some degree by the American founders about America, a providential nation. And a providential nation doesn't necessarily mean that I'm giving a fully theological account. A providential nation means that there's something unique and apart about this country. The founders call it the Novus Ordo Seclorum, a new order for the ages. And they believe America has this providential destiny. And you've got American presidents, even Lincoln and Reagan, who were not extremely devout, I would say, either of them. Reagan would refer to God, but he's like the man upstairs. That's how he'd call him. Lincoln was suspected of being an atheist in his younger days. But nevertheless, both of them had an ironclad belief that the unfolding of America was part of some providential or transcendental scheme. And I think that's... And many times the American founders who thought of this would use phrases like America is the new Zion. Mm. So they themselves understood that Israel has always been part of some kind of a larger providential scheme. And I think the reality of that is more apparent to me now, having been to Israel and had some direct exposure to Israel. So the new kind of obsession with Israel that's coming from a certain wing of the right is at one level disturbing, but I think at another level, they too recognize that there is a certain type of spiritual battle or warfare going on, and they are taking sides in that battle.
Can you describe, from the research that you've been doing for your new documentary, what is this spiritual battle?
The reason you know that you're in a spiritual battle, and in fact, the reason you know that you're dealing with something unique, and in fact, the reason you even know that anti-Semitism is coming into play, because people will say, well, come on, Dinesh, you can criticize Israel without being an anti-Semite. You can criticize the Jews without being an anti-Semite. And I would say, yes, that's true. But let me ask you this. We have had many cases in history, most notably with Japan and Germany in World War II, where some other people starts a fight and they come to your shores and blast you, Pearl Harbor. And they kill a bunch of your people in a surprise attack. And the number of people killed in Pearl Harbor, I don't know the exact number. But the United States then goes, we are at war. it's not like we're going to say, well, you killed 4,000 people. We're going to come back and make sure that we kill 4,000 of your people. No, it's like you have started a fight. We are going to come and pulverize your society into submission. Hiroshima, bam. Nagasaki, bam. And everybody goes, yeah, that was a justified response to this unprovoked attack. Nobody says, the United States is the true guilty party. The United States is committing genocide. Now, admittedly, 30 or 40 years later, you will have academics who will make those kinds of arguments. But Truman never experienced any real guilt over this. And in fact, he never got any meaningful criticism over it at the time. In fact, the Americans were thrilled that the war was over and delighted to be coming home, and it prevented the U.S. invasion of Japan and so on. Now you fast forward to October 7th. Israel faces an unprovoked attack. And the unprovoked attack is cooked up in places like Iran. So Israel has every right to go into those places and pulverize those people and pulverize Iran into submission. And yet, the moment Israel does that, and Israel is doing that, by the way, with a level of discrimination that the United States did not show. The United States made really no meaningful distinction between, let's say, combatants and civilians, right? When you drop an atomic bomb, you're trying to vaporize a city. You don't care if it's got military men, communication systems, or just people walking around. Israel is not targeting civilians. And yet you have all these people go, well, there were only 1,200 civilians killed in October 7th. There have been 40,000 civilians killed in Gaza. So suddenly you're now applying a calculus that you have never applied before to any other society. No other society would be bound by this set of absurd rules. And yet it is being imposed worldwide on Israel. I go to Australia, I hear that. I go to Europe, I hear it. I go to Canada, I hear it. I go to Great Britain, I hear it. So this has become a worldwide phenomenon. And so what it tells me is that there is a nascent or a buried anti-Semitism that is coming to the surface, and the October 7th war is a pretext for expressing it. It cannot be otherwise openly expressed. So it's now expressed in the form of fake compassion for the people of Gaza, but its real target is the Jews of Israel.
You think about the example of the hostages that are still in captivity, the Israeli hostages that are still in captivity in Gaza, who are literally starving, because we've seen videos of them starving. We've seen videos of that kid who is starving. Maybe he weighs 60 pounds now and forced to dig his own grave in a tunnel. And still the Gazans are claiming, and not just the Gazans, those who support Hamas all over the world are claiming that it's the Israelis and the Jews that are starving the Gazans, while we get multiple reports that the Gazans are being sent shipments of food from the Samaritan Purse, from the United States, from the UN, from Europe, from Israel itself, which was provoked and attacked by the Gazans and the Palestinians. And so could there be another example of such a glaring lie, right? You see a starving Jew and nobody cares. And then you see non-starving Gazans, and the narrative is that the Gazans are starving.
Again, put this in historical context. Who expects a society that has been attacked by another society to feed the starving people of that society? Answer, no one. If Pakistan attacked India and India fired back, the idea, if you came and told Indians, hey, you should be feeding the starving people of Pakistan, I don't even know what to say to you. They would look at you like you were out of your mind. The same thing, again, applies to in World War II, where we feed after the war. Yes, the United States was like, all right, we will now, reconstruct German society on a completely new foundation. But during the war, the idea that sort of we had some obligation to feed the starving Germans, it is beyond preposterous. Look, ultimately, I think the question here is whose land is it, right? Whose land is it really? And all these people who proclaim, I believe in the two-state solution. Look, Gaza was a Palestinian state. It had de facto autonomy. Israel tried a two-state solution. It's like, hey, West Bank, you elect your own leaders, the Palestinian Authority. Fine, Palestinians will govern it. Gaza, you elect Hamas. All right, Hamas will run Gaza. And that's been tried for 25 years. And what is the outcome? October 7th. What is the lesson from that? This is not a good way to go about things. This is not a good way to ensure your peace. By and large, as I look at history and I look at the borders of countries, I ask myself, how do they get their borders? There are three ways. One, they get their borders because they were there from the beginning. They were the original inhabitants. That's way number one. By that criterion, the Jews were there in Israel from the beginning, going back to the time of Abraham. So
certainly,
check.
If you read the Bible or look at any of the archaeological
Exactly,
artifacts.
It's indisputable. Number two is you can get a country by some negotiation or treaty. And here we have the United Nations doing a partition. Israel accepts the Arabs' attack. So Israel succeeds on that count. They were given that land in the aftermath of World War II by negotiation. Number three is conquest. And that's actually the most common way. Countries are established because they fought other countries and they established borders. And so Israel won the 48 war, they won the 67 war, they won the 73 war. That's how they got the West Bank. That's how they got Gaza. So whichever criterion you use, Israel checks that box. And yet, to this day, people will go around. We were in Judea and Samaria. People are like, this is the occupied territories. Occupied by whom? Who's occupying it? If you got into a war and you took that land by force of conquest, it's no longer occupied, it's yours. So the world has this, again, they hold Israel to standards that I've never seen applied to anybody else. And that is what creates the suspicion of the anti-Semitic motive. To me, it's not the first thing I look at. It's the last thing. It's when I've eliminated all the other reasons for what you say that I go, well, the fact that you're saying it and you would never say it if it applied to anybody else, that tells me that there's something wrong with your motive.
There are so many Jews that will say to me, Marissa, how can you still believe in God after the Holocaust? How can you still believe in God after October 7th? What's your response to that?
My response to that is that if you go to the first few pages of the Bible, it describes two alternative scenarios. I'm actually expounding the story of the Garden of Eden, but in a very secular and universal way. Basically, what God says to Adam and Eve, when God says to Adam and Eve, don't eat from this tree, what is God really saying? What God is really saying is, I'm not going to give you a reason, right? Here's a tree. I don't want you to eat from it because I said so. So I interpret that to be God saying to man, you can live under divine sovereignty and divine control. I'm the creator of you, so I know what's best for you, so you should do things my way. And that is actually the right thing to do. But Adam and Eve go, no, we don't think so. We're gonna do it our way. The fruit looks pretty good. We don't really think it's going to harm us. And this is also the nature of the satanic temptation. But the effect of it is that man says, I want to live my way. And God reluctantly agrees. So God says, all right, if you want to live your way, you can't live here. In Eden, I will make you a world. And in this world, it's going to be the laws of nature, which operate by natural law, which is to say they include hurricanes and they include earthquakes, and so tragedies will occur. Pain. And number two, I am going to let man set himself against other men by choice. So if you decide to go, commit adultery with your neighbor, you're free to do that. And if your neighbor decides to come back and kill you because you did that, he's free to do that. You're going to have to run your own society. And because it's your way and not my way, when bad things happen, you're going to be to blame, not me. So the great evils of our history, of human history, are perpetrated by human beings against other human beings. But the important lesson, I think, of Genesis 1 is that is the world we wanted. We were given the choice of another world. We said no. We said we want to live in a world where we have freedom, where we have free will, where we operate according to natural and physical laws. That's the world God gave us. That's the world we wanted. And so the consequences of that are borne by us.
What is your interpretation when people say that the Jews are chosen? I make sometimes a snarky little joke, which is the Jews are chosen to suffer. It's not funny. It does seem like it's the case.
It is the case. The whole issue of the Jews is, I think, theologically, and for me, interpreting it as a Christian from a somewhat different angle, is there's a mysterious element in it, because we have a Christian Bible, and first of all, 99% of it is about the Jews. And by that I mean Jesus, of course, was a Jew. And so even the Gospels, if you read them, and this is very striking when I go to Israel, is Jesus lived in a thoroughly Jewish world. Jesus went and bathed in the pool of Siloam. He walked the same road, the pilgrimage road, as other Jews in going to the temple. Jesus was often called a rabbi. If you go to the synagogue in Magdala or in Capernaum, Jesus was in those synagogues and talked in those synagogues. So he lived as a Jew among Jews, and he was part of the intramural Jewish debates. There were debates between the Samaritans and the Samaritans, and there were the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and there were all these Jewish sects dueling with each other, and Jesus was right in the throes of all that. The peculiarity of the story of the Jews is that God doesn't sort of single out these people, because when you say the Jews are chosen, you get the idea that there were 10 groups of people, and God goes, well, I don't know, let me see, I think I'll go with the Jews. But it's not like that, because Abraham originally is not a Jew. Abraham is a pagan. He comes out of Mesopotamia. He migrates over into the Canaanite lands, and it's almost like God brings forth the Jews where there were no Jews before that. So God doesn't choose the Jews in the sense that he makes a selection out of a menu. God brings the Jews into existence. And if you look at what I think are the Jewish contributions through history, certainly out of the Bible, what is it? It's the laws, it's the commandments, it's what we would now call the Western sense of morality, it's the one half of Athens and Jerusalem. All of that is the unique contribution of the Jews, and it's the foundation of our civilization, undeniably. To deny it is to deny one half of what the West is. It's kind of like saying, I'm the product of my dad and my mom, but I disavow my mom. No, your dad is Athens, your mom is Jerusalem. That's how you got here. You wouldn't be here without that. And the mystery is the peculiar, unique relationship that God has had with the Jews through that period of biblical history. It's when I say it's a mystery, what I mean is how did God interact with a particular people in a particular time, and yet that same message is now universalized. Mm-hmm. So you take someone like me, born into a completely different culture. My ancestors convert to Christianity. I come to America. And yet, because of my Western and Christian roots, when I go to Jerusalem for the first time, and Debbie the same, we find it very hauntingly familiar and very spiritually transformative, more than any other place. And I've been all over the place, and I like to go to Florence. I like to go to Dante's house in Florence, the Casa of Dante. And then I like Rome because of all the history, and I like ancient Greece. But I don't have the same sort of deep feeling of identification that I do when I'm just standing in Israel. It is, you get the sense that there's something different over there than there is any of those other places.
Well, there must be, right? There must be something different about this center of the world that everybody keeps looking at, that tiny little speckle. And, perhaps God is assembling his people, and people like you and others who are just looking at this center of the universe to see what his expectations are of us. A story that keeps running through my mind is my interaction with Debbie, your wife, before we walked in here. And I told her that we were thinking about going to Africa on an adventurous trip with the kids. And Debbie's response to me was, well, I'm not that adventurous. And then 5 seconds later, she told me that she's going with you to Israel again. And I'm like, you're not that adventurous? Isn't Israel in the middle of the war? And she says, well, actually, I don't feel like I'm in the middle of the war when I'm there. I feel like there's a sense of a pull that pulls all of us, I guess.
I mean, we were there a few weeks ago, and we were right at the Gaza border.
Yeah.
And we were walking across a big field overlooking Gaza. And we could actually hear, bombs and gunfire. And yet, we also felt like this is where the action is. This is sort of the spiritual center of the universe. And this is not like some eccentric view that I have, because think of it. 3 great religions of the world, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all converge on the Temple Mount, all agree that this is the holiest spot in the world. Probably there would be a giant war if the equilibrium around the Temple Mount was disrupted in any way. So you cannot consider that a normal piece of real estate. If you bring in a real estate agent and say, what's the price of the Temple Mount?
Priceless.
It's priceless.
Yeah. Well, Dinesh, I could probably speak with you for a few more hours, and I have so many questions, but I want to encourage everybody to watch your film, your next film that's coming up. Do you know when we can find it?
It's going to come out this fall, in October, most likely. It's called The Dragon's Prophecy, so it's got this sort of mysterious title. It refers to a great conflict in the book of Revelation between a dragon and a woman. Now, the dragon represents Satan. The woman represents Israel. And so the dragon's prophecy is the great spiritual combat in the end times between good and evil.
Well, can't wait to watch it and share it. And in the meantime, bless you and thank you. And we just love working with you so much.
It's been my pleasure.